Good afternoon, everyone. We hope Contributor Day is going well for all of you. You had several choices for your 3:30 session, and we know it's towards the end of the day, so we really appreciate you spending the next 30 minutes with Brian and I. We have about 30 slides, and if all goes well, we hope to have about 5 or 10 minutes at the end. We can open up to Q&A. It's a small enough group that we can form up in a circle afterwards and just take questions. We can put the mic down and just kind of chat. To skip to the end a bit, though, there is no squash and merge button for conflict. You'll have to work through it. If you came to this talk hoping for a one-button solution, we can't help you. But if you are here looking for more tools to help in the future, we hope we won't disappoint you. So, without further ado, we'll tell you a little more about ourselves, GitHub, a little more about GitHub, and hopefully give you a good reason to pay attention. Again, it's kind of towards the end of the day. Understand a bunch of you actually had a late night last night, too, at the Contributor Summit party. So,
hello, I'm Brian, BWE on GitHub, BWEO and other places, mainly Twitter. And I'm happy to be here. I actually started my career in actually open source thanks to a lot of open source guides and material for me to get started with my first project around code. Fun fact, my introduction to Kubernetes was at my last job, which was at Netlify, where they use Kubernetes pretty heavily for their build bots and machines. They saved a ton of money and a ton of time and a ton of work just implementing that. There's a popular blog post out there about that if you want to find that, Netlify and Kubernetes. And I'm also a self-proclaimed Beyonce advocate. I won't go into that right now, but if you want to come find me later, I'm more than happy to talk about Beyonce. So, Paul.
And my name is Paul. For anyone watching this online later, I'm the one on the right. I have a passion for helping developers deliver products on the cutting edge of technology. When I started my career, that was 3D. Game engines were the one place where folks were standing on the shoulders of giants, and there was less building everything from scratch and more collaboration. So I spent a lot of time in that space, helping developers deliver on their dreams. Today, software is more nuanced and complicated than ever. Open source is huge, with most companies having a product that's built on more than 50% open source technology. Development pipelines and environments that folks wouldn't have dreamt of 5 years ago not just exist, but run at huge scales, and everyone is standing on the shoulders of giants. It's a great time to build software. However, now you need to be more collaborative and communicative than ever you previously had to be. With this additional communication and collaboration comes more chances for conflict. We both work at GitHub. GitHub uses GitHub to build GitHub and organizes everything done by the employees of GitHub on GitHub. From software releases to analytics to marketing to organize GitHub Universe, which was just last week. Most of our communication is over GitHub. We also have access to email, Slack, and video calls, but a lot of our communication is on GitHub and it's written. We have offices around the world, and our small team is just 4 people on 3 continents. The only 2 members of our team on GitHub are actually that work on the same continent are here with you today. So there's additional conflict and concern and challenges that we have from being kind of distributed. I'm sure all of you working on Kubernetes understand and have similar challenges working on such a widely distributed product. Because of our use of GitHub, we both deal with and cause conflict on GitHub every day. So when your team and your company are this distributed, most of your communication needs to be written. You need to be prepared to summarize something and have the first response in an issue be, I don't understand. Although I'm sure you don't have that problem. You need to remember that folks receiving your written words don't have all the background you have. You have to walk a careful line every day. Do you summarize everything and risk losing folks that have to read in 15 pages of background information? For example, of why you've made a change, or why you're giving a talk at KubeCon, or why KubeCon's held in San Diego, or any one of a dozen other topics, right? Do you give people all the background? Or do you place a really short summary and hope folks that have questions chime in? Or do you call extra meetings to discuss things? When you say TLDR, it's really lots of trust required, not too long, didn't read, right? You're trusting each other to make the right decision and share the right information, and that when folks speak up saying, I don't understand, or I don't know what's going on, that there's a space there for questions and comments and to slow down.
So enough talking about us and GitHub, and now let's talk about you fine folks in the room, the contributors. So there's some assumptions that we made in preparing this talk. One big assumption is that you're all human. Am I right in that assumption? I'm going to hold up a mirror just to check. I'll walk around later. Yeah, so those assumptions come with some other things. We're all built on 100,000-year-old hardware, which is our brain. And we also, there's another assumption that you guys are all, or you folks are all working on Kubernetes as contributors. Also the English, you have a good competency in English. That assumption was made because all these slides are in English. So that's a slight assumption. You also hopefully have the same goals as the rest of the members in the room as well. So you're looking to grow or contribute to a project and push that forward. So some good standards and things that Kubernetes actually has adopted is the CNCF Code of Conduct. Yeah. So it's a really good baseline of how to interact with the project itself. It actually provides a framework of best practice for communications and around how the project is supposed to be expected to be managed. I honestly think this is a good thing. This is a good barrier of entry to have a code of conduct. Some projects do this. Actually, most projects in open source, the larger ones, actually use this, and I think it's a good recommendation. And I realize that Kubernetes is an ecosystem and a community, so the other projects that follow suit within the Kubernetes ecosystem have a good standard to follow. There's one other thing that I want to mention too is the amygdala hijacking. If you aren't familiar with this, I'll explain it really quickly, but there is a wiki, you can Wikipedia this, it shows up, it's like the first result. But it really sums up to the part of our brain, which you can call it the lizard brain. It's actually a part of your brain that's the size of an almond, and this part of your brain actually handles all your emotional responses. So if you think of if you were in the jungle and you were swinging through trees and you went to grab a vine, like your brain tells you that that's a vine and not a snake. Another example of this is like our reactions to comments. So if you see a comment on Twitter and it's triggering, like your response is this amygdala. So next time that happens, keep that in mind. But in summary, like essentially it's there for you to process information. It gives you that fight or fright mentality. It also tells you if you should be afraid or not, and a lot of times what happens is that we could be disproportionately afraid based on certain comments that we see or read. So some things that you can't really understand, like through tone. But at the end of the day, we're all trying to achieve a goal. So if we have a contribution or we're trying to leverage these projects or this project, which is Kubernetes, like we're all trying to move something towards a goal. Like we might have a contribution which is based on the fact that we need this contribution because we have to get this done for work. Or we have a project or another library that works with Kubernetes that needs to actually move something along. And at the end of this, like everybody's got a goal and everybody's got something that we need to succeed on. And where the conflict happens is when we all have different goals. Sometimes those don't actually align. So with a big project, the expectation is that you will have some conflict. So how do you feel about conflict? When I say the word conflict, is that a good word or is that a bad word? Raise your hand if it's a good thing. Raise your hand if it's a bad thing. So mostly the bad, we got some I don't know, which is also a very fair response. So there are two types of conflict, which I just shown you. There's good conflict, there's bad conflict. But bad conflict's easy because you can kind of understand or even notice when that happens. I think the biggest problem is when good conflict becomes bad. So identifying as things that, communication that could start off, hey, I have this thing, I want to commit or I want to contribute in this sort of way. And it turns out that this is not the way the project is going. And then we have to make the decision as contributors or maintainers that this is not where we want this to go. So how do you respond to that? So sometimes handling good conflict that turns into bad means, it means giving up on a few things. And one thing is speed. So we might not be able to ship as fast, or we might not be able to hit our milestone when we were focusing on trying to solve these conflicts. So good conflict becoming bad. So this comes out with this identifying when that's happening, identifying those trigger points, understanding that within the contributing MD, it might be good identifying like self-standards and how to communicate within the project and understanding where the project's going and direction. And I know this is probably not news for everybody in the room, but maybe some people this is news for. Like Kubernetes has clear guidelines and they have ways to interact with issues and labels and PRs. But sometimes maybe in our day-to-day jobs or other projects within the space, we might want to also think about some of these things as well. So let's find out the root of conflict with Paul.
Okay, so Brian talked about folks working on Kubernetes, how you all agreed to a standard code of conduct, your brain, and how you behave when you get emotionally hijacked, how your lizard brain reacts, how it processes information faster than your rational brain. We talked about how everybody feels about conflict, and we also talked about how when good conflict turns into bad conflict. Now let's talk a bit about what causes bad conflict. There are 4 common types of conflict. However, any given piece of conflict rarely falls into just one of these categories. There is what conflict or task conflict. It's a disagreement over intended goals or tasks of a project. There is how conflict or process conflict, which is disagreement over how to carry out a process or task. There is who conflict or status conflict, which is a disagreement over who gets credit or who is in charge. And there's relationship conflict, which is your classic clash of personalities. Some folks just don't work well together. If we unpack how these 4 common types of conflicts occur, underneath we tend to find conflict caused by differing perspectives and opinions, lack of respect, or general friction. Very rarely is there conflict when a similar group of like-minded individuals who all communicate in the same way get together and talk. Especially if this group takes time to make sure everyone feels their opinions are heard and respected, that group tends to never find conflict. However, as you start to add in additional barriers, such as culture and language, suddenly you start to see a lot more conflict pop up as folks no longer can communicate as clearly and communication is lost, common goals are lost, common background is lost. Added friction in any process can lead to conflict. Or if there's some conflict already in there, friction can amplify it. We'll talk more about friction on the next slide. So friction is the amount of time it takes to go from I want to I have. This can be really complicated on a project like Kubernetes, since the I want to may be driven personally, maybe by a job or employer, maybe trying to help a friend, maybe by just trying to get work done. There are a lot of different things going on in this very, very complicated, very, very important open source project. So friction can come into this in more ways than your standard workplace or standard open source project. It's amplified by folks' emotional state, how they view others, how empowered they feel. And then lots of you are volunteers and don't feel or may not have as much free time as you would like. And again, any friction can lead to conflict. If we look back to the 2 one-way sign slide Brian was showing us. So in addition to friction causing conflict, there are additional times when conflict is caused more often than not. So when is conflict caused? Late at night, right before lunch or meals, are times when conflict tends to be greater. This could be because folks are rushing to get things done. It could be because for other reasons. This could come back to your lizard brain. I'm not a scientist, I don't know, but studies have shown these. Over large distances tends to be an area where greater conflict is caused, possibly due to shorter communication, possibly due to written communication. And again, these are extra challenges for projects like yours where you've got a distributed group. I know that there are people on almost every continent working on Kubernetes. Unclear communication also tends to lead to greater conflict. I know I personally tend to find the phrase, quote, "where are we with this?" can cause conflict more often than other forms of communication or other phrases. So you're on GitHub, right? A lot of the interactions you're doing are written. So what challenges are amplified by writing only? If you are communicating mostly through writing, then there are definitely amplified challenges there. It's hard to appear empathetic through writing. You can't put your hands on someone's shoulder. You can't see how they're feeling. You can't see how they're reacting. You can't show empathy, and you can't see how what you're doing impacts them. Your tone and your tone of voice is hard to communicate. What is a request versus what is a command can be very unclear. Authority versus requests, when written, can be not just unclear, but can cause status conflicts on GitHub. Asking someone to do something versus commanding can be hard to articulate in writing. Don't use sarcasm, it will be completely lost. This slide is actually taken from GitHub's onboarding material. We think that this is so important that we basically tell our new hires this. Just really important to make sure that when you're writing and communicating on GitHub, you be aware of your empathy, your tone, your voice, command versus request, and don't use sarcasm. So now some tips and tricks to avoid conflict.
Yeah, so these tips and tricks are going to be at the project level. So again, Kubernetes is it's a project. So these things that we've seen in this project as well as other projects that we can recommend. So providing Kubernetes actually has some great standards that I mentioned before, and one is like setting success criteria right off the bat. So having a contributing MD is a very good standard to have, so everybody knows pretty much the open source world that exists, and they can go there first to check how to operate. I also mentioned before code of conduct. We're mentioning it again and again, but it's also very important to have it. So if you start a new project, you want to make sure that exists, so that way people know what their expectations are expected from community members. A couple other things is set a communication standard. So if the communication standard is open up an issue before the PR, like that should be set up within your context of your communication or your contributing MD. Document expectations too as well. Like what's the expected way to report a bug or report some reproducible issues. Like there should be a standard for that, so that way you don't have a bunch of stuff coming from all over the place. And then finally, rewarding good behavior is another really good thing that not a lot of projects do very well. So something else that we should also always try to think about. If something good happens, how do we reward that behavior? Do we bring them onto the project right away, or do we give them a free pair of socks that are left over from the conference? Who knows? But honestly, just thinking about it is also a good first step. This also might seem weird too, the idea of adding friction. Paul just mentioned this, but friction can be a good thing as well. Things like rate limiting conversations and interactions. So if you have an RC process or you have an issue that gets really, really hairy based on the direction of where the project should be, adding a taper or a cutoff time or a time to close this issue could be a very valuable way to constructively get feedback for the conversation. Also, if things get really heated, force that cooldown period. So go ahead, don't be afraid to actually close or lock issues if they do get too heated. Take the conversation elsewhere, maybe take it amongst maintainers until they can come to an agreement amongst the maintainers or the SIG group of this project as well. Friction doesn't have to be always have to be bad. A common use of friction is whenever you have a first-time contributor, there is a label that gets attached to that first-time contributor. A lot of the projects and a lot of bots will actually respond of like a hello, welcome to the project, here's the contributing MD. Or if you open up a PR without an issue, sometimes you'll get some good friction to say, hey, sign the CLA, or hey, please go back and read the contributing MD, or add a tagged issue to this as well. So that's all good examples of good friction. And then collaboration is another thing as well. Spend effort making a nice environment for the community to collaborate in. So I would say live by lazy consensus. Let folks actually raise their hand if they want to be involved. Provide that opportunity for them. Find time to meet face to face. I know a lot of the projects do this where they have a standing meeting or a standing Slack or a standing IRC chat that happens on a weekly basis where people can come, bring their issues, and get that real-time mentoring or feedback. Also be flexible to time zones. As Paul mentioned, we're a team of 4, but we're on 3 continents. So we have to be flexible to time zones to make sure that everybody has a voice and that we're not an American-centric team or a SF-based team. I'm an SF, so sometimes I might be the majority based on who's awake. So again, make sure everybody feels heard and has an opportunity to do that. I would also recommend go in the meetings, go around asking people for their topics or for their goals for the meeting, what they're looking to get out of this. If you find that someone's not speaking up enough, make a friendly gesture to like ask them questions or ask them their responses to something to make sure they also get their feedback. Sometimes silence could be another one of our triggers for if we feel emotional about a topic but don't want to lash out, we could also go silent. So maybe even take that person aside and get their feedback in another channel. So always be conscious around that. So that way, we want to build a diverse open source community. So we want to make sure that everybody has an opportunity. So if English is not their first language and you don't want to speak up because you're not really sure how to craft your sentences, always be conscious of also that too, and providing those other channels for that. And finally, prevent confusion, which is Also, another thing, as I mentioned, English being a second language for some people, like the way if we go sarcasm first, so we have too much jokes on our README, it might go over the heads of certain people. Like not everybody's gonna understand your background and your culture or where you come from. Because even in the United States, like we have different levels of humor and comedy that might not translate from East Coast to West Coast as well. So I would just mention maximize on productivity, finding that channel that you can communicate with them. Don't be afraid to also hide and delete comments. It's another thing I mentioned too. But also set that standard, be transparent. If that's gonna happen, be transparent around if things are hidden or are deleted. GitHub does a really good job of, if things do get deleted or edited, we do note that in the comment or on the issue as well. So you can actually see the history of what's changed previously. So I also want to mention that these are all very GitHub centric too, but examples, but these also work in other channels. So if you have other means of communication, if you have other tools of collaborating with the team or the group, please think about these and take those other places.
So Brian just spoke about things you can set up for your team or project to help prevent confusion and conflict. Here are some things that you can do individually. So one of the things we do at GitHub, and I would highly recommend, is to create a human user guide. Let folks know what hours you work and what hours you expect to work. Include your time zone and your preferred method of contact. This is a template we use. And you can see it good. This is a template we use to make it easier to collaborate with us, let people know what our triggers are, let people know what drives us nuts, what our quirks are, how to easily win us over in an argument, how to easily lose us in an argument, what kind of information we respond to, whether we're data-driven or not. Basically creating a markdown file in your team repo saying, like, here's how I like to work, here's how I like to be interrupted, here's how I like to be addressed. Little things to make yourself more approachable. And this can go a long way in preventing future conflicts. Don't be afraid to personally ask for a pause. Don't be afraid to slow things down or take a time out. It's okay to step away from a situation if you're about to cause conflict or if someone else is causing conflict and you know that there's nothing you can do but exacerbate it right now. Please, ask for a pause. Having some prepared snippets can go a long way to prevent future conflict. I personally like this one. Wow, there sure is a lot to unpack here. I'm going to need a day or two to get up to speed and can weigh in then, right? Sets the expectation, lets the other person feel heard, says I'm going to come back to it, but gives everybody time to cool down. So those are kind of the two best ways we have to prevent conflict. So to wrap up, we're all different and all have our own unique challenges. You will likely encounter a lot of different things as you work in and on open source. Keep an eye out for folks with disabilities, folks with a variety of upbringings, both in terms of education and location. It's possible the conflict you think you see is simply someone just struggling to communicate with you. I hope you don't, but you could also encounter some truly unpleasant things in the form of ageism, sexism, and racism. Clear success criteria go both ways. If folks violate your code of conduct, they should be treated as outlined in the code of conduct, and you don't need to tolerate that. We hope that the tips and tricks we gave you here will help you address future conflict, and we now have about 5 minutes for conversation if anyone has any questions or wants to talk about anything. All right, well, thank you for spending time with Brian and I, and we hope you learned something.